Hey everybody, this is Jason Love, also known as Mr. Hemp. Today I wanted to just have a conversation with you about the plant, Cannabis Sativa L. Basically botanical nomenclature in that case, in regards to how we are seeing things play out in the so-called industry. Right? I use industry in a negative sense. And so if we were to look at a lot of the other terms that are used, recreational marijuana, medical marijuana, the list goes on, I believe those are legal terms that are meant to deceive all of us. The other thing is I see a general pattern, and I think a lot of you see this, is we talk about isolates, THC isolates, CBD, da-da-da-da-da-da. We can go down that list. Isolates are not Cannabis Sativa L, okay? You can't take those pieces in separate components and put them back together and make Cannabis Sativa L. That's not how nature works. And so these things are really important because if you look at all the research out there, they tend to basically look at isolates. Very rarely will you find research where the whole plant is taken into consideration. It does exist, but there's no economic motivation or financial incentive for researchers or pharmaceutical companies to do that. So a lot of times we're not seeing the whole picture because money is the goal and not necessarily health or individuals' well-being or the community's well-being or all of our well-being for that matter. And so if we were to look at, the relationship with THC and CBD, for example, we do see a lot of research indicates that CBD acts as an antagonist to THC. In other words, if there's more CBD than THC, there is a reduced psychoactive behavior. All right. I'm not going to say this is all the time because the THC percentage does not account for the percentages or presence, I should say, of other cannabinoids and terpenes and so on and so forth in the plant. And so we're really looking at a very narrow definition that we see in the 2018 Farm Bill, for example, which frames the so-called definition of hemp as below 0.3% THC. I believe that if we get into the science of this and not nonsense, then we will see that Dr. Ernest Small, who came up with the 0.3% THC reference, his intent was that was supposed to differentiate parts of a plant, not different plants. It wasn't supposed to differentiate between, say, fiber type and medicinal type plants. It was an arbitrary number, as he says, an arbitrary number to differentiate parts of the plants. The other thing is that if this is just based on making something illegal because it's psychoactive, then we should stop running, we should stop cycling, we should stop swimming, because there's something that we've all heard of in regards to like the runner's high, right? So engaging in physical activity can release endorphins and anandamides that also give us a very similar sensation. I was a cyclist. I still would call myself a cyclist in my mind. And I used to experience that as well. I would ride long distances, and at a certain point, you get this euphoric feeling. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? We don't go around saying, oh, opiates gave me a euphoric feeling, they're bad. The pharmaceutical uses them, the industry uses them, and doctors prescribe them. Although I would also argue that that's also not the best thing to do. I think a lot of us know that opiates cause damage, and we can look at like the Sackler family and what's happened with the manipulation of opiates and how harmful they really are. I was on opiates for over 11 years, so I have an extensive experience, personal experience with this. I've been off of those for close to 10 years now. The other thing is oxytocin. Right? So those of you who have fallen in love know that there's that euphoric feeling. We don't make love illegal. Well, that is debatable, I guess. Chocolate falls in the same category. Cheese, right? There's things in cheese that casein can connect to the opioids receptors in the body, right? So this assumption that because cannabis makes you feel good and gives you this high is that it needs to be controlled. We really need to look at this. This is propaganda. I think this whole legal system built around controlling plants and other beneficial things in our foods is built on racism and propaganda and prejudice, right? We can go back to Harry Anslinger. You can go back to, Randolph Hearst, and other people that have built propaganda around manipulating the laws and reasons behind these laws for over 100 years. Now, keep in mind, Cannabis Sativa L has been around for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, and it's been used by cultures around the world for thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And it's only this last roughly 100 years that it's been made illegal. I think it's all built on fraud, okay? So if we look at the other components of what has happened, right? For example, the endocannabinoid deficiency conversation. I believe that people have a sense of being so-called high because they're endocannabinoid deficient, right? So our nutrition itself is lacking, and therefore our body has difficulties or is lacking in producing anandamide, which is naturally made in the body. And so that's a nutritional conversation. So the more endocannabinoids, or also phytocannabinoids, the more your body produces receptors in receiving these molecules, right? So less receptors, your receptors can fill up faster with these molecules. And that also indicates that it's not necessarily the more THC that you have in a product is going to necessarily make you any higher. Once those receptors are filled, then I would argue that the increase of that sensation basically stops or dissipates. And so that's another conversation that needs to be had. I think that what we're watching is basically people have fallen into the trap of believing that we should go down this isolate route, but it's basically you're being told what to do by the pharmaceutical industry. Lobbyists are telling government what to do based on pharmaceutical industry's demands, right? So every dollar that a company spends on a lobbyist, they get about a $740 return, right? So you and I can't afford lobbyists. So this is a completely unfair system from the start. We don't have a voice in all of this. And we just saw that in regards to the DEA trying to move marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, right? So as you go down in the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it doesn't mean that it's better for all of us. I would say that we don't want cannabis scheduled at all. It should be repealed and removed from scheduling completely, okay? All of this is in my mind, a psyop. We're being miffed. Some people in the cannabis businesses, cannabis science, cannabis so-called industry are not your friends, all right? Just because somebody is involved in cannabis doesn't make them a good person, or at least having a genuine or positive motivation to help people. It could be for economic reasons, or just making money, or to control things, or to deceive people, or to make synthetics, right? So if you look at the 2018 Farm Bill definition of hemp, it talks about just THC, but it doesn't say it can't be synthetic, okay? So what if we were to go back a second and take a look at other foods and vegetables and fruits and herbs that are available to us? We don't define them based on a single molecule, right? So oranges are not defined by the amount of vitamin C. This is ludicrous. All of this is ludicrous. I think if we really want to take control of this plant, we can do this. We do have constitutional values and rights and structure, which we can actually take this plant back. And I know a lot of you might argue, oh, well, there's been a Supreme Court case where they said that, we don't have this right. Well, we got to be careful about that, because the Supreme Court is not a definitive answer. That's an opinion, right? So 10th Amendment structure is also really important. A lot of people point at that and say, oh, well, it's states' rights. Well, if you read the 10th Amendment, it also mentions us as the people, all right? So it says, or the people, okay? So it's not just the federal government or states. Constitution is for us. It's not for the government to take things from us. We don't live in a Napoleonic legal system, right? That's where you have to ask permission. We don't have to ask permission. The government is limited by us. So we need to participate in the system to gain our rights and use our rights. They're not just given to us. They don't just automatically work for us. We have to actually use them like you would use a hammer. You don't just look at a hammer and the nail just ends up in a hole. You have to actually pick up the hammer and use it properly so you can nail that nail into a piece of wood, for example. All right. So the other thing is that people talk about, oh, what about the children's safety? Well, that's your responsibility and my responsibility and the community's responsibility. We already have this, and we have to take control of this. It doesn't just happen, just like rights. So, for example, we have all these household cleaners and other things in our homes that are poisonous and dangerous, right? But we grow up teaching our kids, I hope you do at least, that they have to be responsible and be careful of certain things in the house, right? We don't let them go under the sink and grab the bleach bottle and drink it. That's just insane. So this really comes back to taking responsibility to make sure that our children are safe and don't have access to these things. That's not up to the government, okay? So regulations. I believe that a lot of these regulations and laws that have been put in place around cannabis should be removed, completely repealed. There is a different pathway that we can take to actually bring a lot more safety and a lot more openness and a lot more opportunities to us as citizens in the United States and other countries, including Mexico, to where we would have a safer, better, less expensive system, right? These licensing fees out there are absolutely insane, and they prohibit the average person from getting involved in the cannabis potentials, whether it's for medicinals, for food, for fibers, for building materials, energy, the list goes on. And so I'm encouraging you all to have a conversation. Let's have this dialogue and really look at what we are after, all right? So the other piece to this is that because of those exorbitantly high fees and licensing costs, that money gets passed down to the consumer, okay? So the product itself currently is expensive compared to what it could be and what it used to be, all right? The black market is thriving because of in my mind, because of regulations and other structures that have been left in place or even added to. And so if we look at the drug war is a failure. We've spent, $1 trillion over the last 50 years of the drug war. And today we probably have more users of illegal drugs than ever before. We have people on street corners suffering that need help. We shouldn't give up on these people, right? I was somebody that was prescribed opiates because of my accident, breaking my back, and I got addicted to that stuff. It took me over 11 years to stop taking that stuff. And we know the history of the Sackler family and the manipulation of opiates and so on and so forth. That also has to be talked about openly. A lot of people blame people for using opiates, but if you try and blame me for using opiates, I would point you to the doctor that prescribed them to me and constantly made my prescription larger and larger and larger over the years. Higher dosages, more pills, and so on and so forth. That's not my fault. I didn't know what I was getting into. I had no idea when I broke my back in 2004 that it would lead to this. And including my family, they told me, oh, you should be taking your pharmaceuticals. You shouldn't be using cannabis. You're a drug addict. No. Using those opiates made me a drug addict. Cannabis helped me get off of those opiates. Kratom, for example, Mitragenia speciosa also got me off of those opiates. And I think that's actually something important to look at. The DEA made an attempt to make Kratom or Mitragenia speciosa illegal and listed on a schedule of the DEA CSA scheduling. But fortunately, enough people stood up and spoke up and said, no, you're not going to do that. My question is for you. How come you aren't participating in speaking up for the cannabis plant and preventing the DEA from controlling this plant, preventing the government from controlling this plant? That's up to us. We are supposed to participate in our government. We have a voice, and it does matter. Those of you who say it doesn't matter, I believe, haven't participated properly in our government. I've written legislation to bring hemp back to Colorado, for example, in 2012. I won a court case in 2009 where I demonstrated that the government could not prove that I had too much cannabis or cannabis was harmful to me. So it does take our participation, and we do have a voice in all of this. So maybe we should start talking about possibly taking responsibility in the sense of insurance, right? So if somebody goes into my property and has an accident, or if I'm driving a car and I have an accident, we have insurance that alleviates the stress on us economically and protects us based on our responsibility. So if I'm a safe driver, I pay less insurance. I have better coverage. If I'm a shitty driver and dangerous and have had accidents, my insurance goes up, or it even gets to the point where I can't be insured. All right. So a lot of these synthetics that are on the market today, I believe, are actually a result of this terrible, unscientific, nonsense definition of hemp that's in the 2018 Farm Bill. If we look up other definitions, botanical definitions, you'll never see anything similar to what we've been told is the proper definition for hemp, or cannabis in this case. So anyway, I think you guys get an idea of what I'm talking about here and how important this is, and I hope we can have a dialogue about this. I've been persisting at this for so many years. I know my views are very different than most people. Most people just fall in line and follow what they're told to do, but that's not how our government works. We need to participate. I believe that if we come together on these basic, simple references, such as Cannabis Sativa L is the only plant that we're talking about. We're not talking about isolates. So the other piece to this that's important is recognizing the spectrum, or the scale of the plant. Okay, so people can make concentrates. I have no problem with that either. So FICO, full extract cannabis oil, or quick wash, QW, or some people call it RSO. These are references to a infusion or extraction of the whole plant into an oil. Okay, so cannabis resins, waxes, all these things, I think are totally acceptable. It's when we start getting into these isolates, when we start getting to genetically modified organisms, or RNAi or mRNA. These things to me are unacceptable. We need to let nature do what it does and recognize this plant is beneficial and that it can be healing for us as a food, for protein, in the seeds and the leaves, as a medicinal, in the oils, the resins, the terpenes, so on and so forth, all together, right? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, all right? So we can keep looking at all this research all day long where it says THC Delta 8, right, does this, this, and this, or you can try and ban it, but really we need to look at the whole plant, all right? We shouldn't even be in this situation where we have all these states trying to make a different definition for the plant. This is ludicrous. This is not logical. And so we need to come back to the basics and simplicity. I believe this plant is for all of us. The plant was put on this earth for a purpose, and it wasn't to control us. It's supposed to be here to benefit all of us. And I believe a lot of people who are against this plant, who have also experienced things like cancers, for example, or Alzheimer's, or pain, or epilepsy, or Parkinson's, or all these other things, may have found that they ran out of other options. And when they tried cannabis, they realized, wow, this actually does work. So anyway, I can keep talking about this all day, and I'll send some more videos out there, but start this dialogue. Let's have a conversation. Good luck to you all. This is Mr. Hemp, Jason Love. Looking forward to talking with you soon.